Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a continuation of our conversation with Tom Hill. If you saw the first part, you know what a phenomenal memory he has. He can recall details beyond anyone ever that I think, ever known. But it is has a picture because of life the way it was. He was an intense part of every part of it. Last time we talked about Broadway and what changes there have been on Broadway from the way it used to be. And today, there is we are going to have another big change on Broadway, or slightly behind Broadway, in that the city of Revere, Revere Public Schools, it will be building a new school slightly behind Broadway on the site of Hill Park. And Hill Park is named after Sergeant James J. Hill, otherwise known as Hoodsie, Tom's younger brother, who was killed in World War II. Tom, in some ways, I'm sure it's very painful for you to remember, but it can't help but make you proud of your family's contribution to the city, to the country, to the world, actually, for what everybody did for the sacrifice. So let's talk back. Since we started out with Hoodsie, I think everyone wants to know, okay, why was he called Hoodsie?
Well, any time that Hoodsie had a nickel in his pocket, he'd go up and buy a cup of ice cream, which was called a Hoodsie cup. And it was chocolate and vanilla ice cream, a very small cup. And you'd find him sitting on the stairs or on a curb and eating the Hoodsie. And he'd do that maybe once or twice a day if he had a nickel in his pocket, or my father or mother gave him a nickel. And that's how he became Hoodsie.
Well, Hoodsie was very young when he went in the service, right?
Hoodsie turned 18 years old on May 25th, and that the draft board tried to draft him and several other seniors at Immaculate High School, and that the mothers get up and raise Cain with the draft board, and they allowed him to graduate, and then immediately after graduation, in I think it was July 5th, they all went in the service. So they never had a working day in their life. They went directly from high school into the Army. And he was assigned to the infantry, and then from the infantry that they had all kinds of drills and whatever, that then he went overseas. He served with local boys in the Army, Patton's Third Army, at the a couple from Chelsea and a couple from Revere, and that I'm trying to think of now. I know that Butch Ambrosino, the mayor's father, he also served with Patton's Third Army, and he, my brother Hoodsie's division was the Battle Axe division. That when they were in Europe, that they traveled 572 miles in 55 days of combat, which was an amount equal of leaving Revere and going to Washington, D.C. or Virginia.
Wow.
And that he was assigned to the medics. There was many parts of Patton's Third Army. There was a tank corps, there was an infantry, there was a military Red Cross part of it, and that they all got together, and that was it. And that.
So what was his particular job in there?
He was a medic.
Oh, he was a medic.
He was a medic,
Oh.
and that.
And how was he trained for that?
They had sent him to school in Shelby, Mississippi. He went to school there, and that he did quite well. He was a staff sergeant with the unit.
Right, great.
And that
That's
and
wonderful.
that there was no picnic that.
No, because you said that he actually helped to liberate the camp at Dachau.
He was in helped part of the liberation of 3 camps, Dachau and 2 others, and that him and 2 others took a German general prisoner. He was given his gun, his Luger, and his Luger was given to the family, and my sister Grace didn't want it in the house, so they gave it to a Rod and Gun Club, who the Rod and Gun Club had it appraised and it had a value of $13,000, and they gave it back to the family, and that one of my brother's children has it.
Oh,
And
so
that
it is amazing about souvenirs. You know, just before we get to that, you mentioned about the draft board. So the draft board was a local institution?
it was a local institute. It was head by Alex Drinkwater. He was an attorney. His family still lives there
Yeah.
on Broadway at 221 Broadway.
Uh-huh.
And that the headquarters of the draft board was in the police station upstairs, and that anybody that was married and was 36 years of age, they didn't draft because he had family and responsibility, and that the anybody that was younger that became part of the service. In September 1940, they had the Selective Service Act, and they drafted men for 1 year. After 1 year, they were out. Then that expired, and then when the war was declared in December 7th, 1941, then it became the local draft board, and they had local members on the board and that drafted them. And they had quotas set up, who went and who didn't go, and who was needed for the war effort and things of that type.
So there were certain standards that they had. But did it mean that you had to send so many from Revere?
Yes, they were on a quota,
So you had to
whatever
do that,
they had.
yeah. So that must have been difficult for those people, and of course they had to be fair.
Yes, and then they had programs. One program was, I think, the V5 or the V7 program, that they took people like Ted Williams and Johnny Pesky, and then they took them from the Red Sox under this program, and they were to be pilots. And Williams eventually became a pilot, and Johnny was in that group. I don't know if he flew or not, but anyway, he was. And I think they had 3 members of the Red Sox at that time that became part of it. I enlisted at that time, it was in August 1942, with Tony Caffarelli, who was the chief's uncle, chief of police now's uncle, and he was my chum and my buddy, and that they took us over there, and then they sent us home. There was a 2-week wait. They were only able to accommodate 200 a day or a week or whatever the program was. And then October 31st is when I went back to be sworn in, and my first day in the Army was November 12th, 1942. I was at Fort Devens 2 days, and I was shipped to Rome, New York, which was an Air Force base, longest strip in the country. And the 200 of us established a base, and from there they sent me to administration school. And from 14 weeks of administration school, then they sent me to radio school in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and that was an 18-week course. And then we came back to Rome, New York, and from there they said, well, you're qualified for a heavy bomber group, not an air service command. So they sent me to Athens, Georgia, Augusta, Georgia, and I was there for, I don't know, 5 months or so. And then they sent me to Venice, Florida. In Venice, Florida, I had a CO that was a colonel in the war, and he was the father to Cardinal Law here.
Oh.
And he was an ace in World War II, and that was a great guy, and that his job was, before he went in the thing, was set up air bases throughout the country, and that Cardinal Law, I talked to him later on, he was born in Mexico, and he was brought up in Mississippi, went to the seminary in Mississippi, and from Mississippi he went to in Washington, D.C., the Cardinals group there.
Oh, right.
Apostolic group, I think.
Yes, it is. It's
in
the
there,
apostolic
and then
group,
from there he became a bishop.
Yeah.
back in Missouri, back in Mississippi, and then came here.
Well, that's a story I bet not many people realize
Well,
what the background was.
Well,
So,
George Anzoni was with me
oh,
when he came to Revere. He called me, and he said, "I'll meet you when I go to Revere," which he did.
yeah.
And then George Anzoni was with me with Larry Musto, and we reminisced about his father and his mother.
father, right.
He was an only child,
Oh,
and his father was one was an Episcopalian, and the other was a Catholic. And I think his father was the Catholic, and his mother was the Episcopalian, and she became a Catholic. And
that's certainly an interesting background there
Well,
too. So you enlisted. You didn't.
I enlisted.
Why did you enlist? I mean, why?
Well, I was 18 years old, and
And
when I enlisted, I was 20 and 2 months from then.
So
But my brother Bert enlisted, and my brother Hoodsey was drafted.
was drafted.
So
right.
that,
So well,
yeah,
he
people
didn't
were
get a chance to
patriotic.
enlist. So let's sidetrack for a minute and talk about your brother Bert and when he went in.
Well, my brother Bert figured he was the oldest and that part of the family, and that we needed volunteers, and that we were patriotic, and the family was patriotic, and he decided he wanted to be a lawyer, and he was teaching a little bit at Staley's College,
Oh yeah.
the orator school.
Yep. College of the Spoken Word.
Of the spoken word, and that. He decided, he enlisted, and that I wanted to go when he went, and that I went a couple of
Well,
months
how
after.
did your mother and father feel about this?
Well, that was okay by them, that they were patriotic.
It was the time.
Yeah, it was our time to help our country and do what we had to do. I think everybody at that time felt the same, that we were mad at the Japanese and that. At that time in 1941, December 7th, there was 500,000 people that were in the service. And 3 weeks later, on December 7th, 1941, we had 2 million. Wow. And at the end of the war, there was 16 million.
Wow.
So that at that time, there was $30 a month was your salary. And it went to $50 a month when I went in the service. And if you're overseas, you got a 15% boost in salary. And that when I was overseas, I got $93.60 a month as a sergeant.
Wow.
And that.
Well, not very much. As one point of interest, one of our women veterans was at Pearl Harbor. That's Sabina Regioni, who later came out and, of course, worked in the school department. She was a nurse for years in the school department. Wonderful woman.
Yes, Regioni's a nice family.
And
too.
very nice family, right, too. So your brother, you told me, your brother Bert, was a ball turret gunner.
He was.
And I know that from the Randall Gerald poem about, and he said, and in all of the research I did for that poem, he said that was the most dangerous job you could have in the Air Force, was being a ball turret gunner. How did Herb get killed?
They were shot down. They were on a bombing raid in Birnbaum, I think, Germany, and that part of it was a munition factory and an airstrip, and that they were on a 40-plane airstrike, and that up to that period of time, if you had 25 missions, they'd send you home, and then they changed it to 30, and he was on his 28th mission.
And I think they changed it afterwards, because there's a book, Catch-22.
Well,
that's the origin of it. That every time anybody would get close to the correct number that you need, they would up it by another 5. Not because anyone was trying to be punitive, but they didn't have anybody else to
You had a lot
planes.
of problems with frozen faces. The planes would have to fly higher, and the crews, and sometimes they had this crew would fly with this crew, and that crew would fly with this crew, and a lot of cases. My brother Bert was down for 4 days with a frozen face prior
You
to
mean the face was literally frozen?
Yeah. And my my brother's plane got shot down. 7 got killed, and 3 weren't. And one of them, the pilot went through the window in the front of the plane, and the plane landed. It was broken up and all that, but it landed. And one of the I think it was the radio operator, he didn't have his parachute on, and he had an oxygen mask on, and he took off his oxygen mask to see what was going on. There was a fire in the plane, and it blew up in his face.
Oh.
And he had 250 operations on his face. My brother's body was buried within 2 days after by the Germans. And the American Red Cross, or the International Red Cross, took the bodies, the 7 bodies that they had, and they moved them to France, Holland. And he was reburied in Holland. And after the war, when the families requested the return of the bodies, then they brought them back to the United States and brought them here. My family had requested the body to be buried here. Vin Murray, the undertaker, tells a story about this Wally Kushner that had the 250 operations on his face. He was an exchange prisoner on the Cripson line, and the Red Cross brought him back to get him hospitalization here. And they grafted ears on him and a nose and everything else from parts of his body. Vin Murray said, I could stand to see him in the daytime, but not in the nighttime, not in the daytime, because the shadows of his face were hidden by the light and that. And he stayed with me at that time. I was living in Beachmont, and that my son Jimmy was born, and my daughter Judy, and that they talked to him, and everything was wonderful and was great. He always came to see my mother, maybe once a year. He worked for an airlines there, and that he, while he was having these problems back in the States, he got a Dear John letter from his girlfriend, and he eventually married her cousin, and they were together and had a family and everything else.
Oh, that's
while he
nice.
first,
Well, unbelievable sacrifices that were made. Unbelievable. Tom, before we move on, what about your service? Because you represent a whole group of people in Revere. I mean, all kids your age who went off to the service, kids from Revere High School, kids from Immaculate, kids from BC High. I mean, all of them. You all went.
Well, I would say that it changed my life, and I'm sure it changed everybody else's. I worked for the GE before I went in the service, and I had about a 1.5 year service. And when I came back, the GE was on strike, and I'll tell you about that later on. But when I went in the service, that I was in Venice, Florida, as I say, with Cardinal Law's father, and that I got a letter from a friend of mine. He said, I'm in a crash boat outfit here up in New Orleans, and he said, we're on a boat, and we're part of the Army Air Force, but he said we wear sailor hats, sneakers, and dungarees just like they do, and we go to school with the Navy and with the Coast Guard, but we're still Army Air Corps. So I went back. I was on a detail that afternoon with putting in a linoleum at Cardinal Law's office, and he was fooling around with me, and he said...
You mean Colonel Law, don't you?
Colonel Law, I'm sorry. And he said, I'm going to send overseas. Well, we're all going overseas from Venice, Florida. So anyway, when I got the letter, my friend had sent me a picture. This Sam Lombardo has sent me a picture of what he looked like in uniform. So I said, Colonel, you could do me a favor. And he said, what's that? I said, send me up to New Orleans with my friend. So I told him about the letter. So he said, go back and get me the letter and bring it to me. So I did, and I brought it back to him, and he said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll send this up to Georgia, the Air Service Command, and we'll see what I can do. 2 weeks later, I was up in New Orleans.
Oh.
So I thanked them and everything else. And so anyway, I went up there and I went to school. We were on a boat at Lake Pontchartrain. We used to go to Tampa, Florida on a 3-day down cruise and layover on different things, radio, navigation, and things of that type. And then we came back for 3 days. We shipped to San Francisco, and from there we went overseas. I landed in Guadalcanal, and that
I think I told you one of my mother's brothers was in the first wave at Guadalcanal.
So that you get unbelievable that it was 2,000 miles long, and I had 4 stops there. It went from Guadalcanal up to the Halmahara group like a horseshoe, and around into Manila, up around Okinawa, Aishima, into the Yokohama Bay. And that went up with MacArthur's on September 2nd, 1945. Prior to that, I had been in Manila and at the yacht basin, and that we seen the Japs, when they sued for peace, they sent in a small plane with painted white with a green Red Cross on it, so that they wouldn't get shot down by the Americans or anything. And they landed I think at Nichols Field, and they had the peace negotiations, and then they made the deal. My group was to move up into Okinawa, Aishima, in that period of time before September 2nd, which we did. And then we joined the forces going up into Yokohama Harbor on September 2nd, 1945. I was stationed in there from September to, I left at the end of November. I get back here December 5th at Atsugi Army Air Base, which was the Pensacola of the Japanese Navy.
Oh, right.
And that they had underground classrooms up there. They had, like on the mountains, they had entrance where you're pulling trucks if there was an air raid or anything else. And that really at the end of the war, the Japanese had nothing. And that when we got into Japanese Yokohama Harbor, they told us don't go ashore. We stayed on the boats in the harbor until whatever negotiations they did to come ashore. And a couple of officers left and went ashore. And as they went on the shore, they got hit with nuts from bolts and stuff like that the Japanese threw at them. And that when I was acting first sergeant when we got there, and that out of my outfit there was 228 men, but only 28 of us went in with the Army of Occupation. There was 20 enlisted men and 8 officers, and that they gave me a detail of 100 Japs who, anything I wanted to do in the course of a day, I would use Jap soldiers. And that that's what we did. We used them to whatever, setting up camp and getting ready for the rest to come up and join us.
So when did you finally
Well, all
come
the
home?
shipping then went to Japan, and I was one of the first to get out. But they had a point system, and they gave you 2 points for every month you were overseas, 1 point for every month you were in the Army, and 5 points for every area that you were in that was the battleground. So that the highest points came first.
Was there any consideration that you had lost 2 brothers?
No,
Well, you had
none.
lost 2 brothers then.
The consideration was that if you were the sole surviving member of a family that was a male, that you could apply for a discharge and get it. And that
You know,
I didn't apply, and
yeah,
that the war was over and I was coming home.
yeah. Mm.
I happened to be at that time. I was in to be a warrant officer. I was advancing on. I had been acting first sergeant twice. I was only a staff sergeant in rank, but there was no promotions given. I had my record was to be a tech sergeant. And anyway, I would have had to stay a year if I did pass the panel to be a warrant officer. And
Well,
I
there's
said,
no question you
could
certainly
have
would
made
have.
me general. I was
But
coming home.
I don't think that was worth it to you then.
Well,
You have here, I mean, an amazing display. All right. So the picture in the front and then in the back. So maybe we could talk about these. And you've actually kept some newspaper clipping and on Bert and Bert's medals there. Would you want to talk a little bit about those?
well, those are the campaigns that were in and the medals that you were awarded. Part of the Air Force and the 8th Air Force. There was, I think, 12 Air Forces. And I was part of the 5th Air Force, which was a Pacific. And my brother Hoodsie was part of the European campaign, whatever it was there in the thing.
And
But there was 39 campaigns during the war. And my two brothers and I were in 17 of them.
oh,
And there might have been 200 battles, but campaigns, there was 8 in the Pacific, and I was in 6 of them. And that in Europe, I don't know, it must have been the other
right, the remaining
31 of them.
ones. Yeah, right. Tom, this is a great Life magazine in 1944 that you brought, and I know Herb's picture is in here, right?
He's right here on the front, on the Berlin First. That was on one of the raids that they had, and that was shot down also at a later date.
But that's not the. That's
No,
not the
he
flight
was on
which he
the
was killed.
Southern Comfort.
It was at a
Southern
different one.
Comfort is the one he got
Right.
killed
But
on.
that's quite a picture and
Yeah.
quite a piece of history to be there. I notice it says Berlin First.
Berlin First, yeah.
Thanks.
But on the medals, we have more medals because, like in the Philippine liberation, that was to be given by the Philippine government, not the American government. American government issues only American medals, so other people around here got more medals that wouldn't be on what they had.
Right, right. So there must be some way you can petition for them because
I imagine
yeah,
you over
probably
there.
you can, right?
I don't know that.
Right. But or if you travel there, I know that because one of my uncles traveled to France, and in the traveling, they asked him if he had been there before. He said yes during the war, and they took it up and they gave him a medal. So that I think that if you've traveled
sure
there
you would.
and write it down,
Well,
I'm not sure they still do.
They have Army Navy stores that have them
Right,
too and all
yeah,
that.
that you can
You show them your discharge, they'll give you the
That's
medal.
right, yeah, right.
So that.
However, these is it, and why don't you just point out a couple of the major ones there? Because
Well,
you know, we have
right there, that I'd have to refer back to what they were in. That that.
Well, Hoodsie won the Bronze Star.
Yeah, and so did Bert.
And Bert,
So
both.
did- yeah,
I mean,
they
that's quite a thing.
Yeah, and that
and
that's about, I think, the
You
fifth.
said
medal.
Bert got shot down twice, so did he get the
He
Purple
was in
Heart?
about 4 times at the.
Yeah. So that he got the Purple
Yeah, he's
Heart.
got that right there. It's
And
on there.
He was at first reported missing in action
Yes.
because when the plane went down.
Yes.
What was your mother's reaction? I mean, that's almost
Hope. She had
Oh.
hope. And that
Of course,
every mother had hope
of
and all
course,
that.
right.
But,
I remember
you
seeing.
can imagine, like the Stasio family. I think it was in a matter of days they lost the 2 of them.
Oh,
2 brothers. That's Peter and I don't know. I forget the other one's name. Great family and
yeah,
great.
right.
And
You know what's interesting? When I look through the names of all of the folks who were killed in World War II, I noticed that so many of them in the next generation, those children were named after the uncle or the father who was shot down. I think of teachers at the high school, Herb Levine. After that, Zassman's son. I mean, all of the people who were killed. So many of them, their names have passed on. The D'Estasios.
the Hurley family.
Yes.
lost a son in World War I, first one, and the same thing in World War II, first one, the Hurley family.
It's
And
and when it's small, I mean, every time they read the names of those who were killed, when they read them on Memorial Day, there's always somebody. There's a next generation, and then now next generation down, covering the same.
I read there was a poem that they used to have, and there was something on the Civil War, and they talked about a man that was a minister, and he had a son, and the son went in the service, and he fought with the South, and his father tried to talk him out of it. Anyway, his father went in the service, and that there was a battle. I don't know if it was Gettysburg or not. And the father was in the battle, and anyway, he was in combat, and he lined up and he fired a shot, and then he figured he hit somebody, and he did. So he, a couple of hours later, went across apparently to be sure that they got a proper burial. And he went over, and when he got there, it was the son he killed. And it was quite a story.
Yeah,
And I think it was a true story.
I'm trying to remember who said war is hell, and I think it might have been, I'm not sure who it was.
The most terrifying thing is a bombing raid. I go right under the table.
I bet.
We'd have one bomb Charlie in Guadalcanal, and he'd drop a bomb anytime, one bomb, between 10:30 and 2 or 3 in the morning, and you couldn't sleep. You were waiting for that bomb to come and hit and everything else.
Yeah.
And that terrifying.
Yeah.
I remember one day about noontime, we were all having, on our short detachment, we were having lunch, and that the bomb came in right under the table. And I can remember that we were watching Mexican Hayride with a show that they were putting on for us, and it was just off the strip, and it was from the back of a truck, and there was Jeeps and everything else there. The sirens came, we had a bombing raid, and we all took off, and we're going down the strip, and that one of the fellows in my detachment went under the Jeep, and the bomb hit, and the shrapnel killed him. And that terrifying, unbelievable.
Yeah, you know, I mean, and you people were so heroic. I mean, the simple fact of
We
going
never
there.
thought of what you did it. You did it, really.
I think that's been the story always of people who have served their country. It's a kind of courage that Hemingway called it grace under pressure, that no matter what it was, I mean, you did that. And then there's a kind of irony with Hoodsie, about Hoodsie's death.
Never had a chance to grow up, really.
No, he didn't. Just a boy, came home, made it to the end of the war, and then how did he die?
He was at Le Havre, France, coming back, and they gave him a double dose of diphtheria to complete a series of shots. On the way back, the diphtheria worked on him. He was in Fort Dix in line to be discharged, and he was there for 2 days, and they put him on a train, came to Boston. He was at Fort Devens to be discharged, and they noticed a swelling on his throat, and they sent him to the base hospital, and they said, you get diphtheria. So that he went in the base hospital, and they were taking care of him medically, and he died in 6 days. And that...
So your family must have gone from great joy to such
we were happy
such
that he was coming
unbelievable
home.
sorrow. Yeah, that his life was ended there. Well, on behalf of everybody here who's enjoyed the freedom, I want to say thank you to you on behalf of sort of all of us here on this side, to all of you there on that side who did this great service and who have come back to tell us about it, and so we can never forget how much we owe to just ordinary people, just kids out of high school. And,
Kids out of high school, and that they were all friends, and that they ran a time before Hootsie went in with Peter Conley and Boom Sullivan, William Boom Sullivan, 3 of them graduating, going in the service, drafted. And it was held at Reardon's, which was Miss Fay's Inn, and the tickets were $2. And that they had a great time with the mothers, fathers, relatives, and everything else there, and that how times have changed. Boom Sullivan died of a heart attack after he came out, and that he went in the Navy, and Peter Conley, his father was welfare commissioner, and that I think Peter might be still alive now. Yeah. And there's 2 sisters were classmates of mine at Immaculate.
Yeah. I think of, I mean, I had people in subsequent wars. I taught students who were killed in subsequent wars, and I recall thinking of them as being youngsters going off, you know, mischievous kids and just ordinary kids wanting to live a nice life and going through and having their whole lives in front of them, and didn't make it.
In my class at Immaculate, we lost 4. 4 in World War II. Yeah. 4 members. And Dave Hardigan, they named a square after him in Beachmont.
Right.
And it's right at Washington Square, where Bright Street Avenue and Bellingham Avenue meet.
I know it.
And the orator of the day when they dedicated it was John F. Kennedy. He was either running for senator or president, I forget at that particular time. And then he was in the Marine Corps. He got killed, I think, at Iwo Jima. Wow. And then they had Joe Harrington, and that John Hannigan. He was in a plane crash at that.
The 4-H's. Yeah. And all of those.
It was my wife's cousin.
Yeah. Well, it's been wonderful sharing this conversation with you, Tom. It's I remember not too much of World War II. I remember when the war ended. I recall that I was still a kid, and we went around and had a parade, and I remember my mother and all the women walking down the street to church, and the bells ringing, you know, when it was over. And it was we owe to your generation, the greatest generation, we owe a great debt to a great generation. And
I think that what I want, what I like to see, and what we get is respect. Respect for the serviceman. He gives us a lot, and that it affects his family. It affects his whatever he has, his jobs and everything else. That
I think it's interesting what we experience now. That the folks who are coming out of the service now, both men and women, are spending a good part of their lives in civilian life doing service, doing public service in a different way, and they find that it's healing itself to do that kind of thing. And
after the war, I became active in the Legion, and I went to Indianapolis. I went to its headquarters. I went to the 40 and 80 headquarters across the street, and I was picked one of 4 members to be part of the inaugural committee going to Washington, D.C. for Richard Nixon, and in 1968 and 1972. I had charge of the wives of the Medal of Honor winners, and that most of them had a tough life. Most of them became alcoholics, jobs, and things of that type. I remember one guy that I met, Eddie Miller. He come from Michigan, and he looked like somebody's grandfather, like he'd give him a backhander or something. And he left Michigan and went to Van Nuys, California, and became a guard there. Not a big job. And they gave us a book on the Medal of Honor winners. And there were about 3,500 Medal of Honor winners. They had about 200 awards, and I think we've been in 19 wars, 15 declared, 14 not declared. The Congress in the United States are the ones that do the declaring and what we should do. And that they used to get, I think, when they were age 50 or something, they had to apply for it, something like $10 a month. Then they changed it to $100 a month. And then it became $200 a month, and you didn't have to apply. But Eddie Miller killed 7 people with his hands. 3 with a carbine, 3 with a, I think, choked, and 1 with the knife, and unbelievable. Herbie Burr looked like a waiter at the Ritz, something. He had a mustache and all that. Luther Skaggs came out of Kentucky, and he had a wooden leg. He stepped on a mine or something. And that there were protesters the day of the inaugural, and we had all come back into the old office building with the wives and everything else. And Orlando Stagg was standing up, and he had a bottle of scotch on the table. It was half empty, and he was swearing out the window at the demonstrators for them, and everything else. And it was unbelievable. And that, but they told stories about. He said they were in Texas. Maynard Smith. He told about how he got the Medal of Honor. He said he was flying in a plane, and the pilot and the co-pilot get hit and were knocked out. He said, and there was nobody to fly the plane. So he said he came up from his gunnery position to fly the plane. He said the Red Cross had given him a scarf, and they had it around their neck. And he said they took off the scarf, and he had a line across it, a hole across it, and black marks across his throat, that he figured a bullet had gone through the scarf across his throat. Oh. So anyway, he told me Bob Considine had written the article about the Medal of Honor that he had, because it has to be verified by officers and commanders and that. And I looked it up, and it was May 1st, 1943. He said they had 3,300 bullet holes in the plane. He landed it, and when they landed, 3,300 bullet holes. So I said, well, how did you do this? He said, oh, I watched the pilot many times, I know. So when I looked it up in the book, it said it was his first flight. And I don't know, he was calling me, telling me how he got it. And that was him. But well, anyway, he worked for the Internal Revenue. They got him a job.
Unbelievable acts of, I don't know, bravery, courage, audacity. And
but anyway, most of them had a hard time.
Because you do, and it's a case of finding within yourself the courage, the yes, you know enough to be scared, question it. But you don't question it. No, you do what has to be done. So thank you so much, Tom, for sharing this with us. It's been a wonderful walk down the lane here with everyone. So we'll continue the conversation. And we'll go to the beach next time. Okay. A little lighter time.
All right.
Okay.
All
Thanks
right.
again.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.